So I'm Callum from Ark Curriculum Plus, and for those of you who may not be so familiar with us, we provide fully resourced curriculums in schools filled with lots of professional development, classroom resources, assessments, the full works across a range of subjects from Key Stage 1 all the way up into Key Stage 3 and then what will be coming in the near future of Key Stage 4. We also currently have a really exciting options where we're working with the EF to really test the efficacy of our programs. So I will leave my email at the end if you want to let me know if you want any more details on these. I'd be more than happy to share that with you. So just an overview, our curriculums provide sort of the full definitions and sequencing, all your classroom resources, assessments, lots of unit and overall professional development for teachers. And this is really designed to sort of repurpose teacher time so you can spend that focusing on your students rather than sort of building slide decks and other little bits. We go through long, medium and short-term plans, really sort of focusing on bringing your students from and building them in from whether it's like Key Stage 1 or Year 7, building them up through and all the way through to their sort of summative assessments and moving into the more unit stuff. There's pre and post unit assessments and then actual individual sort of lesson by lesson materials. So what I will do is I will finish sharing and pass over to Olivia, who is a campaigner for Let's Toys with Toys, who will be leading us through the session.
Hello, thank you very much, Callum, and thank you very much for having me and for having Let Toys Be Toys. Just as a quick introduction, I'm Olivia Dickinson. I'm a campaigner for the social media campaign Let Toys Be Toys that has been running for over 10 years now. And today we're going to talk about challenging gender stereotypes in the classroom, but the campaign overall is about challenging gender stereotypes in the whole of childhood, but particularly in toys and media and marketing. So the Let Toys Be Toys is a social media campaign that was started back in late 2012. We very much started about labelling toys and books as for girls and for boys, and felt that children didn't have that freedom to choose for themselves the things they were interested in. So we had a very simple ask, which was just asking the toy and publishing industries to stop limiting children's interests by promoting some toys and books as only suitable for girls and others only for boys. Obviously, the real aim was about challenging stereotypes in childhood, but we had some simple objectives of getting the signs removed from shops and the labels removed from books. And there was a change.org petition originally, but now we operate very much across Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. So I want to take you through why we cared about this. So 10 years ago, a lot of us had much smaller children, but it still comes up for parents nowadays. So we think the signs and the stereotypes that those stereotypes represent really matter. They can affect self-esteem, particularly of children, and self-image and limit job expectations. And I'll take you through some figures later about those divides within boy and girl choices. So we really feel that children should be deciding for themselves what they think is fun. They shouldn't be being directed into certain things just because of whether they are a boy or a girl. And then children really need a really varied play diet. Children need that range of play to develop different skills. And then marketing can really restrict those buying choices, and children start to feel they're having to follow rules even before they can read. So this is one of our slogans. If we want equal pay, why not start with equal play? Because if you're not giving those children those opportunities early on, you're really limiting what they're able to do. So I'll be talking throughout the session about stereotypes, and I just want to be clear that everyone knows what a stereotype is. So it's a fixed and widely held idea about a group of people, and it won't just be gender stereotypes, so that's what I'm talking about today. It could be to do with your religion or ethnicity, your nationality, your age, and obviously they're often socially constructed within that. And so I will be talking a lot about how society affects how we perceive those gender stereotypes. So one of the things that we always talk about is quite how early on children are exposed to gender stereotypes, and it's even actually from before birth. So I've put up some examples of baby grows and rattles and toys and things. But I've also got examples in there of gender reveal cakes. I don't think they're used as much here as they might be in the US. But again, you can see that they're blue for a boy and pink for a girl. So it means even before a baby's born, there's a real expectation from society, maybe from immediate family, about what a child might be like. So some researchers have called this innocent socialization. So they're being socialized just to perform in a certain way of how we as a society think girls and boys should behave. And it may come through in all sorts of really tiny ways. So it might be to do with how you talk about your bump when you're pregnant. Maybe you think your boy is a good footballer or your girl is sort of more delicate. But it also comes out once they're babies. There have been studies showing that mothers talk more to their baby girls. They tend to punish boys more harshly. They have higher expectations of what boy babies are able to do once they're crawling. So there's all sorts of ways that they're all innocent, they're unconscious, but they're just little things that are coming through because of the way we've all been socialized. So those are examples of sort of how children are affected very early on. And then these are some of the examples as they get a bit older. So these are toys that might be available in different toy shop aisles. I'll go through some of the successes we've had, but we find even when the labels have been taken down, so it doesn't say girl toys, toys for girls or toys for boys, you tend to end up with all the vehicles on one side and the dolls on the other, and then the packaging is often colour-coded as well. We've got some slogans here of clothes as well, often have a really big impact. So if you go into any clothing shops, there can be, even though they've started to label things as kids, the actual sort of slogans that are used to designate girl and boy can be quite gendered. We also have a campaign called Let Books Be Books that we launched on World Book Day back in 2014. So 11 publishers have now agreed to let books be books. So hopefully most of these books now aren't published anymore, but we had such things as boys and girls being expected to cook and eat different food, colour in different things. The two books in the middle, the Ultimate Colouring Book for Girls and the Ultimate Colouring Book for Boys, have been noticed quite recently on Amazon, and we do try to contact the publishers. We've had a lot of support from different children's laureates and prestigious children's authors as we've gone along, and you can see all of that on our website. These are the 11 publishers who have committed to let books be books, and what that means is they're not saying the books are for boys or for girls on the title, but obviously there are other ways, as you'll see on the next screen, of the ways sometimes children are picking up that whether a book might be supposedly for a boy or for a girl. So Usborne were actually one of the first to adopt Let Books Be Books, and yet some of the displays in big bookshops still start to sort of designate how they might be of interest. Then the other way that you'll know small children particularly are surrounded by stereotypes is in children's TV and media. So I've got a few different examples here of the ways that children are sort of seeing those stereotypes. So on the left, we've got PJ Masks and Paw Patrol, and what they always represent is the lack of female characters. So PJ Masks is 2 male characters and 1 female character. Paw Patrol just has Skye. There have been 2 additional female characters added more recently, but the core group of 6 is 1 out of 6. And then the others I've put up as examples of how often the male characters are seen to be heroes. They use fighting, they use battle, and the female characters are often about beauty or appearance. What I have then tried to do on the right-hand side is show some more positive examples to show how children's media has been getting better. So we've got Encanto, which was praised on Disney a few years ago for being really positive representation, both about ethnicity and gender. And then Bluey, if you've got small children, you'll know about Bluey, which shows 2 female characters, Bluey and Bingo, and a stay-at-home dad. And there's been a lot of praise for that in terms of positive representation. So some of that is there, but across the board, there tends to be, you know, dads are presented as buffoons, mums are presented as a bit nagging, the boys are presented as boisterous. So Bluey breaks the mold there. Then we've done 2 different surveys across our time of advertising to children. Obviously, advertising's changed a lot in the last 10 years in terms of children are watching less linear TV and not seeing the ad breaks, but they are still seeing a lot of advertising on YouTube. And so we look specifically at toy advertising in 2021, and we also looked previously in 2015. And while there was some improvement between 2015 and 2021, what we were still finding is that the adverts that either featured girls or were very obviously aimed at girls had words such as love and magic and glitter, and the ones that featured boys or were supposedly marketing just to boys had particularly words such as battle and activate and robot. And you can see, I mean, the one thing that did improve between 2015 and 2021 was that there are many more examples of TV adverts that show boys and girls playing together. They tend to be mostly around board games and sort of outdoor games, but at least they are showing more examples of children playing together. And then these are the word clouds we did in our original research back in 2015. And you're very welcome to use them from our website. We know teachers sometimes like them either for when you're looking at stereotypes in sort of early on in Key Stage 1 or 2, but they can also be used as a sort of language tool up in secondary, and sociology teachers have always been quite interested in them. So these are for the girls and these are for the boys. So as you can see, there hasn't been a massive change across the 6 years we did the survey. So there's a documentary from 2017 called No More Boys and Girls, Can Our Kids Go Gender Free? So I'm going to show this little clip that has a talk from Gina Rippon, a professor of neuroscience. So she will talk, and then I'm going to pick up what she's saying.
It's common sense that there are basic biological differences between the sexes. But do these differences explain the way that children think? To find out, I've come to see Professor Gina Rippon, one of the country's leading experts in neuroimaging, to see if there's something about how the children's brains work that could explain it.
What are the differences between boys' and girls' brains anatomically?
$64,000 question. Structurally, there appears to be very, very few differences, which is quite a surprise to a lot of people who have assumed for hundreds of years that males and females are different because their brains are different. So you couldn't look at a brain scan and say, oh, that's a brain scan of a male or a brain scan of a female.
That really doesn't explain why boys and girls might behave differently then. If you say the structure of the brains are, there's no differentiation between the structure.
Well, the other thing that we now know about is that the brain is very, very plastic, moldable, changeable, that something isn't necessarily fixed and invariant, which is what was always thought about the brain. What we now know is that brain development is very much entangled with society, experiences, upbringing, and the differences we're seeing are not because they were determined at the moment of conception. It's because this hungry brain arrives in the world, and the world is instantly plunging it into a tsunami of pink and blue. And I think we have not been aware till recently of how big that influence is.
So what Gina Rippon was talking about there is the plasticity of the brain, and it's always quite a useful thing to think about how moldable that brain is in relation to what it's being exposed to. So if you think of everything, the previous slides I've just shown in terms of what children are being exposed to in terms of the toys they're played with, the media they're consuming, that is why when children are starting school or as they grow up, you yourself might notice differences between girls and boys that may be to do with how they've actually been exposed to different things. So to pick this up, I've made 2 book recommendations. So that's Gina Rippon's book itself, The Gendered Brain, which is a good read. And then the Gender Agenda is a story, an account from a mum and a dad about bringing up their boy and their girl. So it started on Twitter, and it's basically just sort of showing that in real time of how the boy gets different comments than the girl, and vice versa. And so what we often talk about is ultimately boys and girls are more alike than different. And so it's about giving them that equality of opportunity. So what I want to turn to now is how, if you think about all of that that's happening in their early childhood, where that then brings us as we come into secondary, into subject choices, and even into career choices. So 22% of physics A-level students were girls in 2019, and that hasn't really budged. 23% of English literature A-level students were boys in 2019. And again, I think that went up ever so slightly last year, but not much. And then 26% of art and design A-level students were boys. So art and design, English, languages tend to feature fewer boys. And then some of the STEM subjects, so particularly maths and physics, feature a lot fewer girls. And then thinking about where that takes you once you're getting into careers, 11% of the UK engineering workforce is female. And again, that hasn't changed for a long time. And 11% of UK nurses in the NHS are male. There was a slight uptick since COVID. More young men have been interested in studying for nursing. But again, it stayed, it's practically 90% of the workforce are female. Obviously, the NHS workforce itself has a lot of doctors in as well, but I think 3/4 of the NHS workforce is female. Half of doctors who are now studying and training are female, but in senior roles, they are still dominated by men. Then we come to the mental health aspects and sort of how society is affected by all of this, which is that 96% of the prison population in England and Wales is male, and 75% of suicides in the UK are male. And suicide is the biggest killer of men under 40. There's some great charities campaigning around this, such as Calm, and it's worth looking up some of those figures and thinking about what's needed to be raising our boys so we're not coming up with these figures again and again. And then the other way we think about how men are being raised is how are they becoming dads and parents? And 2 in 5 working fathers who applied for flexible working have had their requests turned down. And the take-up of paternity leave has been abysmally low. There's obviously whole policy issues around that about how it could be better recompensed. But again, there is this expectation that women are the primary caregiver and men are being penalised for wanting to do that. And then from the age of 6, girls believe that brilliance is a male trait. So there's a great study that's worth looking up from a few years ago where it's quite a sharp drop off. You ask 4 and 5-year-old girls and they're absolutely happy to be brilliant. And then they start associating such things with boys. And then 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner, male partner in England and Wales. And again, those figures in terms of femicide have not changed for a very long time, despite efforts being made about violence against women and girls. So again, there's a whole thread here of how we're affecting our boys and girls to sort of conform in different ways. So now I'm going to turn to what you can actually do in the classroom. And one of the things I had said originally is we'd look at what the statutory guidance is around gender stereotypes, because obviously you've all been having to teach the statutory relationships and sex education or relationships and health education for primary since 2019 came in properly in 2021. So what I'm going to do is say a very brief bit about statutory guidance, because actually there's not much, it's not as detailed as you might expect, and then talk about what we call our 10 ways to challenge gender stereotypes in the classroom, which you can also look at in more detail on our website with further reading. So the statutory guidance is actually quite simple. They just say that by the end of primary, children need to know what a stereotype is, how stereotypes can be unfair, negative or destructive. And that is not just gender stereotypes. That might be around nationality, ethnicity, religion, sexuality. Then by the end of secondary, again, as part of respectful relationships, you know how stereotypes can cause damage. So that's encouraging in terms of what I've just been showing about the damage that gender stereotypes can do, and then how they might encourage prejudice within society. But that is it. There's not, I mean, as teachers, you should know that, the RSE is not that sort of specific by key stage or year group. And obviously, I'm only talking about England at this point. I'm not covering Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland. So what there has been since the statutory guidance, there are 2 documents that are worth looking up on the non-statutory guidance. So I've put the links there, and Callum can always send them around afterwards if you're interested. But again, it's just worth looking on the DfE website. But again, there isn't much more detail. What there is that's encouraging is a bit of what I will then go into around how you can sort of embed challenging gender stereotypes through all your practice. And some of that does cover off being acutely aware of sexist and misogynistic behaviour in both in the classroom and in the school. Obviously, everyone's been very aware of it after everyone's invited, and me too. There's all sorts of things in there around sort of being age appropriate, and again, it's just worth reading up what that says. So we did a survey when the No More Boys and Girls documentary came out in 2017. We did a survey from Let Toys Be Toys about how teachers themselves felt about gender stereotypes, how they were being prepared to teach them, how they could manage them in the classroom. And we weren't that surprised to find that 19% of teachers, although they were advised as part of their initial teacher training to challenge gender stereotypes, they were not always given ways to actually combat that stereotyping effectively. A quarter of teachers said that their training actually reinforced gender stereotypes, which we found quite disappointing. This was a while ago. We're hoping that there's been some progress in that. And then 80% of teachers had not actually been offered any training about challenging gender stereotypes in the last 5 years. So I've written a blog about that for Optimus Education. You can look at the actual surveys themselves on the Let Toys Be Toys website. And teachers, I think it's always very interesting to see how things have progressed. So what we've tried to do is, off the back of that, is actually offer our 10 ways to challenge gender stereotypes. I'm going to take you through each of them, give some examples, and then you can ask questions at the end. So the first one is providing a range of role models. So always give children real life examples that counter stereotype. So it could be from TV and media that they've seen, or books that you're reading in the classroom, but it's also thinking about, what are all the tables named after in year one? Are they all male authors? What are the rooms named after in the science department? Are they all male scientists? And then set an example yourself. So if you're in preschool, be happy to dress up. If you're higher up the school, be happy to do something that might be sort of counter stereotype, whether it's to do with cooking or kicking football, depending on your gender. Challenge stereotypes when you hear them. So this will probably be more for the early years teachers, where you'll get them sort of gender policing themselves about saying, that girls can't play football, but use real life examples, whether it's of yourself, of what you can do, or give examples that are high profile. So obviously the Lionesses, the women's football doing so well last year, have really made great role models that you can use immediately. Then look at who uses which spaces and equipment. So again, if you're thinking in a sort of preschool and key stage 1 area, it could be to do with what the colour coding is, and that there does seem to be this innate thing where boys and girls have learnt what pink and blue mean. But also look wider than that. Think about the school playground. I've always said there are many theses that can be written about how football dominates and how there becomes a gender divide. I know of schools where in the end football has been banned, but the kids still find something to kick around and the boys still end up dominating. But think about what the book corner is representing, what books have you got out, even the colour of those books. And then think about how you can make different areas of, whether it's your classroom, your whole school, so what's your library like in the secondary school, that feel welcoming to everyone. And then pick other ways to divide up the children. Now, as far as we know, not many people anymore line up girls and boys, but maybe if you're, getting them all to wash their hands before going to lunch, don't do it by saying, can all the boys go now? Think creatively, who's had toast for breakfast, whose favourite colour is red. Try mixing it up a bit, and because otherwise what happens is they're always thinking the most important thing is that I'm a boy or a girl. And that's where then they start to think, oh, I'm other from boy or girl, and really reinforce the stereotypes. And then try to use inclusive language, not just about the pupils you're teaching, but about the people they're interacting with and their families. So don't say, give the note to mum, talk about parents and carers. Try not to use gendered language when you're coming up with sort of pet names for children. Definitely try not to say man up or girls only do certain things. And then the one I personally sometimes find quite hard is don't give a girl a compliment you wouldn't give a boy. So it might be you often praise a girl on their appearance, their hair, something they've got in their hair, that sort of thing. But also don't tell a boy off for something you wouldn't tell a girl off for. Have you got different expectations of behaviour? And is something a boy does seen as more boisterous than if a girl did it? Then the other one that I think teachers have talked to us about a lot is who do you call on in class? And one thing that teachers have said is quite helpful is to almost audit each other. So you won't be aware of it, but if you have someone sitting at the back or ask your teaching assistant to look at it, is look at, oh, actually I did call on 3 boys in a row, or do I always call on that girl first? And just think about how you can make it more equitable. Certain ages, let's say the sort of year 4s, year 5s, will absolutely love to spot you on this. So you can even ask them to do the audit for you, but be careful. And then, are there girl jobs and boy jobs? So you might start to say things like you need 3 strong boys to move the chairs, or 2 trustworthy girls to take a message to the head's office. And again, it's thinking about, are you putting children into boxes? And that will continue throughout secondary as well. Even though there will start to be physical strength differences, what is it about a boy or a girl that makes them more appropriate for certain things? The thing I think particularly in secondary, that I think it happens later in primary as well, is seating plans. Some schools and some teachers choose to sit their children girl, boy, girl, boy. They choose to put them in boy, girl talk partners. Why are you doing that? Have a think about how that's benefiting them, or if it's not benefiting them, and what their feeling is about that. And also, as my son always used to say, because he was in a primary school class that had a lot more girls, he said, well, it doesn't work anyway, because there are only 12 boys, so you couldn't always do the sort of boy-girl partners. And then think about rewards and sanctions. So we've had both girls and boys be outraged about all the boys getting punished for something just because there was some noise, some outcry, and so it's just all the boys get punished, and they don't really dig deeper to find out who was doing the thing. Are you expecting girls to be quieter, or are you not praising the girls for behaviour that they're expected to have? So it might be being tidy and quiet or reading well, but you are overpraising a boy for doing that. And then think about how you're swapping that round. Are you not praising a boy for certain things that are against their sort of gender? And then how are they rewarded for different actions or with different things? So one teacher gave us an example where they were really worried about having pink and blue stickers, and then she started mixing it up, and actually the children didn't mind at all. So it's thinking about, are you putting those sort of society expectations into those rewards? And then one of the most important ones we always talk about is creating a safe space, that when the children are at school, that they feel that there's no judgment, they can play with anything they like, they can say whatever they like, obviously within reason, but that there's a real culture of acceptance. So they're not being judged for what they might be reading, they're not being judged for what they say they watch on TV. And so again, you can tie that into school policies on bullying and equality, and just think about our children sort of suffering any discrimination based on how they're being perceived for doing girly things or boyish things. Books could be a whole other webinar, but it's worth looking up some of our recommendations on our website. And then there's a great campaign called End Sexism in Schools that's done 2 studies recently on gender bias for Key Stage 3 authors and GCSE authors. So lower down the school, you might be thinking about what sort of role models are being presented, whether they're in picture books or chapter books. So working mums, caring dads. The factual books are showing as many women as men in things like inventors and composers. And then as you go further up into Key Stage 3 and 4, there's a real dearth of female authors being studied, and yet Key Stage 3, nothing is designated. So you really could widen that out, think about who the protagonists are, think about who's writing those texts, and then obviously not just within English, think about how you're using books in other subjects as well. And then the final one is to keep talking about stereotypes all the time. So I think that's the difference from saying that they're just in the RSE curriculum. You should be trying to have that thread through all your lessons and throughout your classroom. So while in RSE it is, it is worth probably every term revisiting challenging gender stereotypes, thinking about how each year group can start to identify stereotypes, come up with different ways of challenging them, and you can build upon that. You might do toys in year 1, and by year 3 you might do jobs. In year 5 you might be looking at things like body image. But although you can be teaching it every year, that might only be 1 or 2 lessons across the whole academic year. So try not to keep gender stereotypes in RSE only, but think about how you can thread them through all sorts of things. So whether that's, in D&T when you're making toys, in English when you're looking at different types of media and writing, in history when you're looking at key figures, or you're looking at careers advice. So do the teaching about female inventors and male dancers, and female composers and male nurses. And again, there are some brilliant books and resources out there that will give you those ideas. And I'm sure it's worth, sort of talking to all your fellow teachers for ideas. Then what I wanted to pull up was some of the organisations who are doing some really good work in this area. So in the middle is Graham Andre, who featured in that documentary. So Lifting Limits and Gender Action both advocate what's called a whole school approach to challenging gender stereotypes. And the Gender Action one came off a programme from the Institute of Physics, which was originally about getting more girls into physics, which it did. But off the back of that, it's also got more boys into art, languages and English. And it's just really produced a whole anti-sexism culture in secondary schools. And then they've tried to, if you look it up, it's still sort of in pilot phase, but they're looking at how to make that work in primary schools as well. Lifting Limits is doing something very similar in primary schools. Women in sport, I don't think I had a chance to talk about this in detail, but one of the key areas it's worth looking at how gender stereotypes particularly impact girls is as they go up the school, they become less keen on doing sport. And again, there's lots to do around gender stereotypes. And then I've put in there quite an old document, but I really would advocate it, called the Gender and Education Mythbusters, Addressing Gender and Achievement Myths and Realities. If you just Google it, it's on the National Archives website and a couple of other education websites. This is the one by Professors Becky Francis and Christine Skelton, and all of it still stands. It's evidence-based, and it just gives some really basic things around how to get boys doing more reading and more writing, how to get girls into sport and science. And so it is worth looking up. Then I've also put up some of the work from the NEU. So It's Just Everywhere is their report on challenging sexism in schools. And some of that does include sexual harassment in secondaries. And then the Fawcett Society did a very good literature review a few years ago for their Commission on Gender Equality in early years. And again, it's worth looking up because they've got some great links and resources that it's worth looking at in terms of how it's impacting in the early years. And then some book suggestions. Cordelia Fine is always brilliant alongside Gina Rippon in sort of debunking the whole male and female brain myth. Lise Elliott is slightly more accessible in terms of how to approach that from a parenting perspective. Caroline Criado Perez's Invisible Women, I think would be enjoyed by some of your students much higher up the school. And then Matt Pinkett has written 2 books. He's got a new one out at the moment called Boys Do Cry. I think it's on pre-order. But he and his colleague Mark Roberts wrote Boys Don't Try, which again covers all of those things around things like how don't use a boy-friendly curriculum just to get boys into writing. So there's all sorts of ways that you can look at that. So this is my final slide. It's just a quick summary of what those 10 ways are, but you can find them on our website as well. And then I've also shown our where we are on social media, where you can find us. So we're on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and please do follow us. And then what we're always keen to find is examples. So since we advertised this webinar, for example, someone's already sent us examples of how the Entertainer store isn't making the changes that it's committed to. So those sorts of things we're always interested in. What do you see when you're out and about shopping? Because our focus is very much on toys and shops.
Once again, thank you for joining us, Olivia.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone that's attended along.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.